The day dawned clear and bright, a perfect setting for what should have been the happiest day of my life. James and I had been looking forward to this moment, surrounded by friends and family, ready to pledge our lives to each other. Yet beneath the surface of celebration, a storm was brewing, one that would cast a long shadow over our union. As the ceremony began, I couldn't help but notice Rachel, James's mother, standing aloof from the other guests. Her presence was like a chill in the air, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt both invasive and accusing. It was clear from the outset that she viewed me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a rival for her son's affection. The reception that followed was a blur of congratulations and well wishes, but one moment stood out starkly against the backdrop of festivity. Rachel approached us, her gaze locked on mine with an unsettling intensity. I expected perhaps a begrudging word of congratulations or even a thinly veiled critique. Instead, she leaned in close to James, her voice a whisper meant for his ears, but loud enough for me to catch every word. "You're mine first," she said, a statement laden with ownership and a chilling promise of conflict. James tried to brush it off, a tight smile not quite reaching his eyes as he assured me it was just Rachel's way of coping with the change. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me. It was as if her words were a curse, foretelling the struggle that lay ahead. The celebration ended, and as we made our way to our honeymoon, I hoped that the distance would give us respite from the tension. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. Rachel's words were not just a warning, but a declaration of war, a battle for her son's loyalty that would test our marriage in ways I could never have anticipated. In the days that followed, as James and I tried to navigate the waters of our new life together, Rachel's presence loomed large. Calls, unexpected visits, and thinly veiled insults became a constant reminder of the battle lines that had been drawn. It was clear that, in Rachel's eyes, I was the enemy, and she was determined to reclaim her son, regardless of the cost. Our honeymoon in Cabo San Lucas was a brief escape from the reality waiting for us at home. Yet, even as we basked in the glow of our new marriage, the shadow of Rachel's warning hung over us, a dark cloud threatening the very foundation of our union. Cabo San Lucas offered a temporary sanctuary, a paradise where James and I could pretend the world outside didn't exist. Our days were filled with sun-drenched beaches, crystal-clear waters, and laughter that echoed under the vast open skies. It was a time of connection and love, a brief interlude where the only thing that mattered was the life we were building together. The warmth of the sun seemed to melt away the icy encounter with Rachel, allowing us to bask in the joy of our newlywed bliss. However, as with all escapes, reality awaited our return. The transition back to daily life was abrupt, made even more challenging by our living situation. Moving into military housing meant not just adjusting to the rhythms of military life, but also to the proximity of Rachel, who, as if by some cruel twist of fate, had decided to move into a house directly across the street from ours. Her reasons were cloaked in concern for James, especially given the unpredictable nature of his deployments. Yet her actions spoke of something far more invasive. It wasn't long before her presence felt like a constant surveillance, her eyes always watching, always judging. She would find excuses to come over, each visit an intrusion, each conversation laced with subtle digs at how I ran our home or supported James. Rachel's shadow stretched far beyond the physical proximity of our homes. She would call at all hours, sometimes to check in on James, sometimes under the pretense of needing help with something around her house. Each interaction was a reminder of her warning on our wedding day, a signal that she did not and would not accept me as part of the family. The most striking example of her invasive behavior came just weeks after our return. James and I had planned a small get-together with friends from the base, a simple barbecue to enjoy the camaraderie and support system that military families often become. Rachel, uninvited but undeterred, appeared at our doorstep with a dish in hand, proclaiming her right to be there because, after all, this was her son's home too. Her presence turned the atmosphere tense, her comments loaded with implications that I was somehow failing in my duties as a wife. It was clear that Rachel saw herself as the matriarch, the central figure in James's life, and by extension, the lives of those around him. Her actions were a calculated effort to maintain control, to assert her dominance, and to remind me that, in her eyes, I would always be an outsider. This period of our lives was marked by a growing sense of isolation for me. James, caught between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me, often felt torn. He did his best to mediate, but the strain was evident. The joy and connection we had found in Cabo were increasingly overshadowed by the specter of Rachel's interference, a relentless reminder that our battle for a peaceful life together was only just beginning. The shadows that had begun to gather around our marriage deepened with James's deployments. Each time he left, he took a piece of our shared happiness with him, leaving behind a growing void filled with uncertainty and fear. When he returned, it was as though a stranger walked through our door, his once vibrant eyes dulled by the things he'd seen and the burdens he carried. James's struggle with PTSD was a silent storm that raged within him. He became a fortress of solitude, locking away his pain in an attempt to protect me, but the distance between us only grew. Sleepless nights became our norm, with James haunted by nightmares, and me powerless to ease his torment. Rachel's reaction to James's suffering was a complex web of denial and blame. She refused to acknowledge the depth of his struggles, brushing off his symptoms as mere adjustments to civilian life. Yet, her denial turned to poison when directed at me. According to Rachel, I was the catalyst of his pain, the reason for his inability to just get over the horrors of war. Her accusations were relentless, each word a dagger meant to undermine my role as James's wife and supporter. Her interference escalated, becoming more aggressive. She inserted herself into every aspect of our lives, using James's condition as a pretext to assert her control. Doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, even our attempts at finding moments of normalcy were all subject to her scrutiny and unsolicited advice. This period was marked by a series of confrontations, each one more heated than the last. Rachel's presence in our home became more frequent, her criticisms more pointed. She painted me as the villain in James's narrative, a narrative she recounted to anyone within earshot. The community we had once found solace in began to view us differently, their perceptions colored by Rachel's relentless vilification. The strain took its toll on James. The man who had once looked at me with love now gazed at me with a mixture of confusion and resignation. His attempts to defend me were half-hearted, worn down by his mother's insidious influence and his own internal battle. Rachel's ultimate act of interference came when she attempted to take over James's care completely, suggesting he move back into her home for a while, for his recovery. It was a suggestion that felt like a verdict, a public declaration that I was unfit to care for my own husband. The humiliation was overwhelming, but the fear of losing James to the depths of his despair and to the clutches of his mother was paralyzing. In the end, James's decision to stay was a small victory, marred by the cost. Our home felt like a battleground, our marriage a casualty of war. Rachel had succeeded in planting seeds of doubt and division, leaving us to navigate a maze of emotional landmines. The love we had shared, once a source of strength, now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the relentless campaign Rachel waged to reclaim her son at the expense of everything we had built together. The turning point in our story arrived on a day that began like any other, under the weight of the same heavy silence that had become a constant companion in our home. James's battle with his demons, a struggle that we had faced together yet apart, reached its tragic conclusion. The vibrant, kind-hearted man I had married, who had once faced life with unwavering courage, succumbed to the shadows that had enveloped him since his return from service. His decision to end his suffering was a silent scream in the deafening quiet of our lives, leaving a void that could never be filled. In the aftermath of James's death, grief became my shadow, a relentless reminder of the love and life we had lost. But in this time of profound sorrow, Rachel's grief took on a different form, transforming into a twisted madness that sought to lay blame and inflict pain. Her accusations became more pointed. Her belief that I was the root of James's despair solidified into a venomous narrative that she spread with zeal. Her most grievous demand came in the wake of our shared tragedy. Rachel insisted that James's ashes be kept in an urn at her house, a final and unyielding claim over him even in death. It was a demand that felt like the ultimate betrayal, a final assertion of her dominance and control over the son she could never truly possess in life. Driven by a mix of grief, anger, and a desperate need for closure, I conceived a plan born from the darkest depths of my mourning heart. I decided to rig the urn with a grenade, a symbolic gesture that represented the destruction Rachel had wrought upon our lives. This plan was not just an act of retribution, it was a twisted attempt at liberation, a way to sever the toxic bond Rachel had forged with her son and, by extension, with me. The preparation was meticulous, each step a dance with madness. I acquired the grenade through means best left unspoken, driven by a singular focus that blurred the lines between justice and vengeance. The urn, once a simple vessel meant to hold the remains of the man I loved, became the instrument of my vengeance. I rigged it with a care that belied the insanity of the act, setting the stage for a final confrontation that would end Rachel's reign of manipulation and pain. Inviting Rachel over under the pretense of a peace offering was the final act in my plan. The urn, now a deadly trap, sat prominently displayed, a macabre symbol of the twisted journey that had led us to this moment. As she entered the home we had once shared, the air was thick with the unspoken tension and grief that had defined our relationship. The moment of reckoning, when it came, was swift and shocking. As Rachel reached out, perhaps in a rare gesture of acceptance or maybe to make one final claim on James's memory, the trap was sprung. The explosion was a violent release of all the pent-up rage, sorrow, and desperation that had consumed me. In that instant, Rachel's life was extinguished, her final moments a testament to the destructive power of unresolved grief and vengeance. As the dust settled, I was left to confront the horror of my actions. The silence that followed was more profound than any I had experienced before, a stark reminder of the cost of my vengeance. In seeking to free myself and James from Rachel's grasp, I had become ensnared in a web of my own making, a prisoner of my grief and rage. The realization that my quest for justice had led me to commit an act of unfathomable darkness was a burden I would carry for the rest of my days, a poignant reminder of the thin line between victim and perpetrator. The aftermath of my actions left a silence so profound it felt like a void, swallowing any remnants of the life I had once known. The room, once filled with the echoes of our shared past, now held nothing but the consequences of my desperate bid for freedom from Rachel's tyranny. The air, thick with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder, was a harsh reminder of the line I had crossed. In that moment, the distinction between justice and vengeance blurred into obscurity, leaving me adrift in a sea of moral ambiguity. As I stood amidst the wreckage of what was meant to be a final act of liberation, I realized the magnitude of my folly. The plan, conceived in a moment of profound grief and anger, had not brought the solace I sought. Instead, it had cast me further into darkness, a place where the light of reason and compassion struggled to reach. The realization that my actions had not only ended Rachel's life, but had also irrevocably altered my own, was a burden that weighed heavily on my soul. The grenade, meant to sever the ties that bound us in a twisted dance of manipulation and resentment, had instead bound me to a new legacy, one of guilt and remorse. In the days that followed, as the authorities pieced together the events leading to the tragic explosion, I found myself recounting the tale with a detachment that belied the turmoil within. The narrative, once so clear in my mind as a righteous quest to reclaim my life and honor James's memory, now seemed like the ramblings of a lost soul caught in the grip of vengeance. The community's reaction was a mix of horror and disbelief. To them, I was no longer the grieving widow, struggling to cope with the loss of her husband and the relentless pressure of an overbearing mother-in-law. I had become something else entirely, a cautionary tale of how grief and hatred can drive a person to the brink of madness. As I faced the consequences of my actions, the legal and moral judgments seemed almost inconsequential compared to the internal trial I endured. The mirror no longer reflected the woman I once was, but a stranger marked by the scars of her choices. The path to redemption, if such a path existed for me, was obscured by the shadows of the past. In the solitude of my reflections, I pondered the lessons of this tragic tale. The cost of our vendettas, the collateral damage of our wars waged in the name of love and loyalty, became painfully clear. James, the unintended victim of a battle he never chose, and Rachel, whose love for her son had morphed into a destructive force, were reminders of the complex tapestry of human emotions and the unintended consequences of our actions. In the end, the silence that enveloped my life was a testament to the destructive power of unresolved conflicts and the depths to which we can fall when consumed by grief and vengeance. The explosion that had ended Rachel's life had also shattered mine, leaving me to navigate a world forever changed by a moment of madness. The quest for justice, once a beacon guiding my actions, had revealed itself to be a mirage, obscured by the fog of war that rages within the human heart. As I grapple with the aftermath, the echoes of that fateful day serve as a haunting reminder of the fragile nature of our morality and the thin line that separates victim from villain. In seeking to write the final chapter of a story marred by pain and loss, I had unwittingly authored a tragedy, the repercussions of which would ripple through the fabric of my existence, a somber ode to the cost of vengeance and the elusive nature of peace.